Hi everyone, it's Jann with What You Make It, and oh my stars. And I really do mean stars, because today's project started out being all about the stars. I had gotten the Tim Holtz Alterations die that is called Bright Wish, and it's dimensional, and I pulled it and some other supplies out. You see I have a holly embossing folder in the back, and my intention was to show you how to make these little stars, and I promise that I will, because they turned out really cute. But that's for another day, because I ended up really focusing on the holly embossing folder and ended up with what I think is a cool card. Now I'm still working off of my original idea, and I had planned to use some natural colored sticky back canvas to create just a really simple but rustic background. So I have cut a card base at about 4 by 5 1/4 because I wanted it a little smaller than my card, and I'm sticking the sticky back canvas on it so that it will hold the embossing really well when I put it through my embossing machine. Now I put it in the folder here and realized the holly was not going to fall where I wanted it to. It was right up in the middle of the card. So I don't know if you have ever done this or not, but you can cut a little slit in the top of your embossing folder, and as long as you leave about 1/4 of an inch on either side, it will work great. With the slit, I will be able to put the canvas into my embossing folder, but I needed to make it a little more narrow, so I cut off about 1/4 of an inch. Now it's going to slip really nicely into my embossing folder, and you can see that I now can have it up where the holly is down at the bottom of my card base. Much better. Got a great impression with the sticky back canvas on some cardstock, and it's really pretty, and I'm really loving it. But I'm beginning to think that maybe the background actually needs to be the star of this card. Just too much with the star. So now I'm ready to move on with this background. Before I add any color, I want to kind of do my distressing with my distress tool, and you'll see that I've done a little stitching around the edges to create a border. You can leave that step out, or if you don't have a sewing machine, you could take a marker and draw some lines. Now I'm going to use Copics to color in the berries and the branches, and the first color I use is R37, and I'm just dabbing the color on. Because sticky back canvas is fabric, it will bleed a little bit, so just be very careful with it. I moved on to R59 just to do a little shading on the berries. I'm not blending, I'm just dabbing color. For the branches, I'm going to use E57, and again, I'm just letting the marker barely touch the canvas, and it absorbs and expands, so you don't have to do a lot of coloring. I'm using E59 to go back in and maybe give a little depth to these branches, giving a shadow on the underneath side, just defining them a bit. Now we're going to add color to the leaves, and I'm using Bundled Sage Distress Ink and an ink blending tool. And just take your time on this. The flatness of the tool allows you to get most of the color on the raised areas. And by keeping your tool flat and just brushing across the top of it and going back over and to build up the color, you can really get the color built up really nicely without getting a whole lot of that color on the background. I'm now going in with peeled paint, and again, just brushing the holly leaves with this color just lets you kind of build that up. To kind of distress the background, I've taken Vintage Photo, and you start off the craft mat and work onto your piece of canvas and work all your way around the edges. I'm using Vintage Photo here because it has a reddish undertone, and that will draw out the red in the berries. But I want to darken the edges, so I'm going in with walnut stain and really pushing that color into the edges. It's fraying it a little bit. I just think it gives it a very lovely distressed look. So I am looking at it and I put it on top of my card base and I realized that it's really cool and distressed, but I think I need to do something else. First of all, I need to trim it down a little bit because remember we cut the canvas down, but then distressing it and putting some walnut stain around that really helped. But I still was thinking that it did not have quite the cohesive look. So I took a couple of distress stains. I used iced spruce and evergreen bough, and both of those were too green. So I went back to peeled paint distress stain and decided I would just add that to the edges of the card. The focal images, you don't have to do it all over because the focal image is going to cover it up. And then I took a little bit of the iced spruce to add a little gray into it, and then dried it with my heat tool just to get it good and dry, and then added yet again some more walnut stain. Just really wanted to make the card blend better. Now I'm going to add the sentiment, and I cut a little banner, and I was checking to see how long I needed to make the banner before I stamped the sentiment, which is, I believe, Holly Jolly Christmas, which made perfect sense for that, and just checking again to see where I needed to put it. Went a little crazy with the dimensionals, but at this point I really wanted it to stand up and look great. So I've added that, and then just going to double check it and put some dimensionals on the back of the banner. You'll notice I've left it long. I always do that. I go ahead and put it on to the card and then cut it where it needs to be. So that's just a little trick. Turn it over and cut that off, and add a little bit of distress stain to that edge. Now I'm adding just a little drop of distress rock candy stickles because I'm wanting to get a little bit of shine. Put the drop there and then use your finger to spread it around. One of the great things about using distress stickles on a project is that it's okay to be impatient and go ahead and try and speed it up by heating it with a heat gun. Guys, thanks for sticking with me today. We started with stars and ended with holly, but I love how the card ended up, and I hope you were inspired. I'll be back soon with another project. In the meantime, be sure and take some time for creative play.